Hi everyone, I'm Christian Miller. So 9.6 billion people are projected to inhabit the Earth by the year 2050. We're already struggling to feed the 7 billion that we have now. So many questions are arising about how are we going to sustain this Earth and how are we going to preserve food for future generations. A couple solutions have come up in the recent past, but none of them quite compare to the uses of genetically modified organisms. A genetically modified organism, or a GMO, is defined as an organism altered through genetically engineered processes to contain one or more additional genes that weren't originally there. This brings me to my main claim of my speech, that GMOs, or genetically modified organisms, are beneficial to society. They're beneficial for these three following reasons. Number one, they increase the size of production. Number two, they're safe to the public. And number three, they're cost efficient. So going into my first point, GMOs increase the size of production. There have been several studies in the recent past about that specifically show that GMOs have, or genetically modified technology has increased and evolved. But specifically in the past 2 years, genetically modified technology has really taken off. Drake Bennett, a Harvard graduate who now works for Business Week in New York, observes that in 2014 alone, genetically modified technology increased crop yields by 22%, it reduced the use of pesticides by 37%, and it increased farmer profits by 68%. This shows that GMOs not only increase the size of production, but they also generate bigger profits to also generate the GDP of the US. Products that yield bigger, or products that collect a bigger yield, are going to help future generations and assure that food is never going to run out. And you might be thinking that food is always going to be there and always be accessible, but you might not know that according to the popular newspaper, The Economist, the Food and Agriculture Organization reckons that food production will need to increase by 70% in order to properly feed everyone in developing countries. Genetically modified organisms are the best way to reduce that number. My second point, for my main claim, is that GMOs are safe to the public. Students from UC Davis's Department of Animal Science program did a 29-year-long study that covered over 1 trillion livestock's productivity and health data from both before and after the introduction of GMOs. They found that there was no change in the animal's health when their feed consisted of 100% non-GMO compared to when it was over 90% GMO. This clearly states that genetically modified organisms do not harm the animals. And even in the off chance that it did harm an animal, the EPA does not allow sick cattle or ill cattle to process their meat or products into the market. So even if an animal did get sick, they don't allow their products to go into the market, so there's no way it can get to you. Another article written by Alison Bandinanam, an expert in environmental impacts, claims that genetically engineered DNA has not been detected in the milk, eggs, or meat derived from animals fed genetically engineered crops. This is true because an animal's digestive system is so acidic that when a GMO gets into their system, it will break it down so much that it can't even survive long enough to get into the products. So it won't even be able to make it there. And then my third and final point is that GMOs are cost efficient. They also help developing countries. And because there's so much more product that can be made from the same amount of crops, farmers' profits are going to increase at an alarming rate. Since the majority of crops are actually located in developing countries, farmers and workers in those places, in those populations, are going to be benefited a lot. And they're actually already starting to be benefited. Drake Bennett, the Harvard graduate that I mentioned before, claims that in 2014, the yield and profit gains were greater in developing countries than in developed countries. It's going to take a lot, obviously, for a developing country to increase and catch up to a developed country, but I think that GMOs are actually setting that on the right track. In conclusion, genetically modified organisms benefit society. They do this in numerous ways, but the three major points are that they increase the yield of production, they're safe, and they're cost efficient. I hope you guys have developed a better understanding of what GMOs actually are and how they impact the society. Thank you.
All right, the proposition's clearly identified. There's an excellent layout of what the secondary claims are going to be. You signpost those in the body of the speech. That's pretty effective. I do think you need to explain a little bit more what's controversial about the nature of the subject and why that you need to make this particular argument. The statistical information you present on the first point is good information, but it's very conclusionary, and it's not coming from the person who did the research. It's coming from a reporter in that situation, so I think primary evidence would be a little bit better for you on that particular point. On the second point, you've got this study. I think you said it was a 29-year study, so that's interesting. I think it's, again, I think we'd want to have direct quotes from it. I think you're kind of paraphrasing on that, but I did appreciate the citation of what study you're talking about. You explain what the information is on that second point also about the safety of the products. The cost efficiency issue is again, a little generic in nature, but I think you explain it reasonably well and explain why that's important. So I think you're doing a good job there. You had an excellent summary at the end of the speech, and you do a good job speaking to the audience while you're presenting.